Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. We're live from Ottawa, the nation's capital today, as we always are. A little later this morning because we've got a guest from the West Coast, and that's Odessa Orlewicz. We met almost a year and a half ago at an event, and we've been talking ever since on the internet, and she has got a fantastic podcast, Liberty Talk Radio, but she's going to be joining me in a few minutes as soon as we get a few things out of the way. We'll be right back with the As I See It monologue.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Please like the station. Now it helps us beat that YouTube suppression, which I'm a victim of every day. But we're not here to complain. We're here to fight back. We're here to resolve to resist. And that's what this program is all about. Please subscribe. We're trying to hit 50,000 within the next 3 weeks. I know it's ambitious. We can do it. We can do it with your help. Thank you so much for supporting the station in all the ways you do. And please resubscribe if you have to. Before I bring Odessa on to the stage with me here, want to make a comment. This is the As I See It monologue today. Why is the Conservative Party of Canada cancelling its candidates? At exactly the same time, it was calling out Mark Carney for not cancelling one of his candidates for a very egregious, shall we say, effrontery? Shall we say breaking the rules? Shall we say possibly even breaking the law? Yes, I'm talking about their candidate Paul Chiang. The focus was on Paul Chiang. But what did the Conservative Party candidate decide to do? Focus on their candidates daring to exercise their free speech. And I'm speaking specifically of Stéphane Marquis, who was running against Stephen Guilbeault, the environmental extremist, the former climate change and environment minister. And they accused Stéphane Marquis of talking about conspiracy theories. Like what? That NATO expansion might have provoked Putin into the invasion of Ukraine? Yeah, that goes back to 1990, when various European leaders assured Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not expand eastward from West Germany. How about that the CIA and the MI6 might have engineered a coup d'etat in 2014? Maybe the war really began in 2014. Is that a conspiracy theory? No, that's a fact. Bill Gates isn't making billions of dollars from pharmaceuticals. That's a fact. The World Economic Forum doesn't want you to own nothing and eat bugs. That's a fact. Look at their website. These are not conspiracy theories. The conservatives have disappointed us again. And no, this is not an appeal to not vote conservative, but it's an appeal to keep the conservatives honest and focused on free speech. Because if Pierre Poilievre doesn't believe in free speech, God help us, because Mark Carney doesn't. Or is this really all about who's controlling this campaign, Jenny Byrne or Pierre Poilievre? Now, without further ado, I want to bring on our guest today, Odessa Orlewicz. Thank you so much for joining me, Odessa. And
Thanks.
it's these are exciting times, and I'm what I'm trying to do is interact with as many other podcasters as I can in the next 3.5 weeks as we go through this campaign, because I really believe we've got to get the word out about Mark Carney, how dangerous Mark Carney is, and what's your perception about Mark Carney in terms of his posing a threat to Canada?
He is so dangerous because he's convincing people, not very well, but he and the CPC together are convincing people that he's mainly going to do what Poilievre originally said he would do. And so he's stealing all of Poilievre's ideas, I don't know why people don't notice that. A certain population of Canada doesn't notice that he's basically stolen all of what Poilievre was running on. And Canada doesn't know that he will compulsively lie to get elected. And within a couple of years of him getting elected or sooner, he is going to absolutely annihilate what was left of Canada. He is Chatham House. He is the elite. He is City of London. He has worked in the City of London, which is almost a country outside of itself, outside of the law. And so he is used to working above the law. He doesn't consider himself having to follow law. He is the, I would say, green New World Order himself. And he is just so dangerous because people actually think that he's here to save Canada, and it's quite the opposite. We're going to end up under the thumb of the EU, is what I believe.
I think you're entirely correct. Before I forget, I wanted to show this clip from disgraced Liberal candidate Paul Chang, Markham area. He was an MP, I think, well, he's still an MP. I don't think he's officially resigned yet, but he was the Liberal candidate for re-election in that riding. Outrageous announcement that people should somehow abduct Joe Tay, who is then his Conservative opponent in that riding. Joe Tay has since moved on to Don Valley North. He's running there now. But of course, Chang encourages people to somehow abduct this man, bring him to the Chinese consulate, and pick up their $183,000 reward. Bounty hunter. But we found the clip. I think a lot of people have been showing this. We found the clip where Chang actually said this, and I just wanted to show it to people.
It's running. Most probably is, the Chinese community knows Joe Tay, Zhang Jing. Right? He is looking for the nomination. The Chinese media knows him. He was in the media business in Hong Kong, and here in Canada, he's a radio host, or I don't know, for Singtel Media or Fairchild, he was a media person. So that's all he did all his life. But also right now, he is wanted by the Chinese government, and there's a $1 million reward on his head. So they want, if you guys want to pick him up and take him to the Chinese consulate, you make him $1 million. I'm just joking, but there is a arrest warrant out for him from the government of China, and there is a reward for him. But apart from that, I can't say more than that right now.
Well, I think he said enough. But that's that sealed his fate. Of course, Mark Carney defended this man vociferously. Not intrigued. He admitted that it was probably not the smartest thing to say, that it crossed the line, but he'd been so many years in public service as a peace officer, as a police officer, that how could anybody possibly question his integrity? But of course, when China is in the question, Mark Carney is remarkably uneasy. He doesn't want to say anything to offend China, and I think that's the lesson here. Is that Mark Carney did not want to move against Paul Chang, even though he moved against various Indo-Canadians during the leadership campaign. He's stolen a constituency away from Chandra Arya in the Nepean. No problem disqualifying Chandra, but he's not from China, and there's no Chinese influence there. But I just think this whole episode just absolutely reeked of Mark Carney's hypocrisy.
Yes, and it also reeked of his arrogance. Like, you don't tell me what to do. You don't bother me with this little stuff. Don't bother me with this China stuff. I could care less. He doesn't understand Canada the way people are feeling. He's European now. He's a European bankster, part of the City of London. He's here for them. He's not here for us. And it shows in his arrogance, in his don't bother me about that. I'm not going to get that guy to step in. Now, I do believe in free speech. And so it's ridiculous, I think, that one of the conservatives stepped down or was fired for what he said. And you were talking about it in the show. It's ridiculous. He was only stating facts. But in this case, I just saw the whole, Carney, oh, little ones, don't worry about it. I'll tell you what we're going to do. He's just, he doesn't, it's just so obvious he is not here for Canada. He's here as a banker.
Yeah, he is a international banker. That's what he is. Now, I wanted to show a clip. You did a interview recently with Mark Carney. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Matt Carney.
Yeah, Matt Carney. Yeah, and he had some incredibly cogent remarks about Mark Carney. So I just have a brief clip of that.
Pure blood technocrat. He doesn't believe in politics. He believes in real power. Carney understands that the system that we live in is primarily, it's a little bit democratic, but it's mostly oligarchic. And he understands the oligarchic game very well. And to move that power into an unelected body of technocrats with a fund that could essentially steal through bail-ins, the savings, people's family savings and commercial bank assets, in order to turn that into equity for investments into the industrialization under a war economy against Russia for Europe. Now, you have something similar in Canada, where Mark Carney, just like Draghi, was overseeing the creation of the bail-in mechanism, that mechanism that's been installed within the Canada Banking Act in 2016. That was Mark Carney who played a big role in drafting and bringing it into legal effect, as it was done with the European Central Bank, with the idea that under a time of crisis, funds can be stolen and converted from people's savings in the banks into a new type of sort of stock within the bank to win the oncoming war with Russia, or to win the war against global warming by taking their assets to use as investment into building windmills and a war economy, which is part also of what Carney has been initiating also. That's another aspect of the game plan that I see currently in configuration.
Welcome to Liberty Talk. I'm Odessa Orlewicz.
Now, of course, you can see the rest of that interview on Odessa's podcast on Liberty Talk Radio, and I encourage you to do that. I've watched it. It's fascinating. What fascinated me about this interview, Odessa, is that we're finally getting more people out there talking about who the real Mark Carney is. Mm-hmm. And I've done a series of, I hate to use the word deep dive, I hear it all the time, but I tried to see who is Mark Carney, where did he come from? Yeah, we know he's a globalist, but people don't seem to know how connected he is to China. And at various times in his career as a banker, he has advocated the replacement of the US dollar with the Chinese yuan as the universal global currency. And he's also suggested that China needs to replace the United States as the chief economic engine of the world. And every time I read this material, or I read the speeches that Mark Carney made, especially one he did in Wyoming in 2019, and once again, he was the governor of the Bank of England at the time, and he was actually driving the economy further into the ground as the governor of the Bank of England, and we're probably going to see the consequences of that very shortly in England, where there are reports the Bank of England could actually capsize in the next couple of weeks. But I found the relationship to China fascinating, because who, of course, talked about the fact he admired China's dictatorship, that it would, because they could turn things around on a dime. And this is exactly what conservatives have been saying from day one of this campaign. There's no difference between Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. They're both globalists. They both love China. They both have the same net zero policies. They are both anti-energy. They both want to drive the Canadian economy into the ground with taxation and regulation. And finally, people are waking up to this Chinese connection, which I find fascinating. And Mark Carney has actually gone out and said that he really admires the way China is so good environmentally. And of course, that is absurd. Even if you believe that there's a greenhouse gas emission problem, China is the worst offender.
Yeah.
And if you define pollution like most sane people do as being not carbon, but toxic toxic ingredients into the environment, nobody does it better than China. There. And coal-fired plants, China China loves it. So do you find this absurd that somehow Mark Carney can get away with this two-faced attitude?
Well, he's getting away with it because CBC and CTV and all the mainstreams, they won't cover the truth. So yes, in regards to, I hate to call it sheep, but in regards to the Canadian population that isn't awake at all, he is getting away with it because the people that watch CBC, a lot of them don't even know how to get into Twitter. They don't even know what Rumble is. They get their information from CBC. And it's those CBC voters that are going to allow Mark Carney to win. And I really look forward to the debate. Hopefully Carney even does a debate. He better, against Pierre Poilievre, because all of this information, unless the Conservative Party who's, running things is so asleep on the wheel, they better be making notes of everything that's legit that Carney's ever done so that Pierre is ready to annihilate Carney. There's no reason that Pierre Poilievre shouldn't annihilate Carney in a debate. And so if they don't pull out all of these things that, look, you found them easily, I found them easily. If they don't, then in my mind, Pierre is scared of Carney. He knows the high levels he comes from, and he's submitting. There's no other reason why Carney can't get annihilated in the debate.
So Carney is already said he won't do the French language debate, and that absolutely mystified me when I saw one of the polls recently. I actually think it was Abacus saying that Carney actually is leading in Quebec, and I'm thinking this is absolute insanity. He won't even debate in the French language debate, and yet his numbers are going up in Quebec.
Yep.
Do you think there's a chance that Carney could just not debate Pierre Poilievre because he figures he's got nothing to lose? Because yes, I agree with you, Pierre Poilievre would probably destroy him in that debate. So do you think Carney could possibly get away with just walking away from that debate?
I don't think it's a very good idea. I think that a lot of Canadians that were going to possibly vote for him won't. But in the same token, maybe his team is so aware how badly he might perform. Maybe they're looking at which is worse for voting. I don't know. All I know is they're maintaining that Carney is the only one that can deal with these Trump tariffs, and they're hoping that that psyop is what gets him to achieve winning. In this day and age, nothing will surprise me. If Carney is able to walk away from a national debate, which has always been the most sacred, the most important way for people to figure out who they want to vote for, then we're done as a country. It's done. We're done. There is not even a shred of democracy left.
Well, that actually, you raised a question. I wasn't even going to get into that, but what's the feeling in BC right now? I'm very much aware because of family in Alberta, and I recently interviewed Daniel Smith, and I talked to a lot of folks from Alberta, and I just had a guy on the show the other night who's running in Alberta, and the feelings there are of such high alienation that the potential for the rise of separatism is very real. Are you getting a sense in BC? And I grew up in BC. I'm from Vancouver Island, Comox, the air base, all that stuff. I grew up there. I still consider BC home. Is there the same sense of alienation in British Columbia? Maybe not the same degree as Alberta, but is it growing in BC as well?
The problem with BC is, although a lot of people have woken up, to the nonsense, we are under the NDP David Eby thumb here provincially, and the news just the woke psyop garbage that, again, spews out daily on our local global news, again, it's you have half that know what the truth is and you half that are being psyop daily. So this is the woke, as you know, this is the most woke province. It's, the war between the two just keeps rising and rising and rising. And the fact that the local Conservative Party provincially almost won, in fact, one riding they should have won because there was a scandal with votes that proves they should have won there. But we have woken up a lot in that way. But the whole stuff with Indigenous and the lies about the 215 bodies, it is a war here. And I know that a lot of British Columbia was planning on voting for Pierre months ago. But again, this trade war thing is hurting. It's really hurting his chances. And I have to say, it really bothers me because Pierre has made statements. I think the best statement that Pierre ever made, but of course, the news won't show that, is Trump is going to do what Trump is going to do. We need to concentrate on building up our economy, etc. I think that was the best comment that anyone could make. We can't tell what Trump's going to do. And they're trying to make it sound like Carney will be able to control Trump. That's just not true. He's tariffing still. And I have to say, I was very, very disappointed. I watch CBC every night, even though I want to slit my wrists, but I have to do it. I'm sure you do too. And they had a round table. And of course, they pick and choose who they have on. And in this round table, they had a guy that kind of seemed like a trucker. He had that kind of job. And they presented him and they said to him, "You are the people that are on the fence. Tell us what's going through your mind." And he said, "For the last year, I've known that I'm going to vote for Pierre Poilievre. I really like everything he stands for. But since Trump has just put out that he's friendly towards Carney and he thinks they can really work together to help each other's countries," he said, "now I'm going to vote for Carney because of that." So these people will just flip on a dime because of their fear about tariffs. And so I am actually very worried about the election.
Yeah, I am too. I'm not looking at this like the polls are all crazy, and we'll get to that in a second. But I think what you said, I'm so glad you mentioned it, that Poilievre did say Trump is going to do what Trump is going to do. And that's a realization that Donald Trump is right now the most powerful man in the world. And he's basically doing whatever the hell he wants to do. And Donald Trump doesn't care if Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney are disagreeing. He's going to do what he's going to do. And yet, that should have been the final word on it from Pierre Poilievre. But he's been, time and time again, forced into making more and more combative statements against Donald Trump. There are members of the Conservative Party who are not even actively involved in the campaign, but their name recognition is still out there. People like Corey Tenike, who are saying, "Oh, he's got to get more combative against Donald. He's got to fight Donald Trump. It worked for Doug Ford." Nonsense. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work for Pierre Poilievre, and he's got to stick to the change. And I got to mention it now because I read this article the other day by David Coletto, whom I knew when I worked for Sun News. He was the Sun News official pollster, and his polls I trust probably more than anybody else. I think he's a very good pollster. But if you read this column he wrote for The Hub the other day, it's quite interesting because what he says is, no, don't fall into the trap of getting into a war with Donald Trump. You're never going to win that. Talk about change, change, change. Make it that simple. Remind people that where were we 10 years ago when Stephen Harper lost the election to Justin Trudeau? How has the country changed since then? How is the per capita GDP? We're now the lowest in the industrialized world, next to Luxembourg and Mexico. How about the homelessness crisis? How about the affordability crisis for homes, for anything else? How about inflation? It goes on and on. Pierre Poilievre needs to focus on change, and I have gotten that message out as much as I can to the people I still know in that party who are running things. But as some people have pointed out, it doesn't get past Jenny Byrne, who I blame for a lot of the communications problems, because she's running this campaign and she's running it badly. She deep sixed the 2015 Harper campaign by basing it all upon a ridiculous advertisement that said he's just not ready. Speaking about Justin Trudeau, that was Harper's campaign to lose. He should have won.
Mhm.
This campaign is Poilievre's to lose. He should be winning this. He was 25 points ahead at the when Justin Trudeau announced he was planning to resign. And yeah, I'm concerned too, Odessa. I'm very concerned because I don't like what's going on with the communications. And I have to mention this again here because I woke up this morning to this story. I never heard of this guy before. Stéphane Marquis. He was the Conservative candidate in a Montreal riding that's currently occupied by Stephen Guilbeault, the former environment and climate change minister, one of the most radical members of the Trudeau cabinet. And this guy apparently, from what I've been reading, had a good chance of winning. He's a popular businessman in the riding. And what did he talk about? Well, he questioned a couple of he actually suggested Bill Gates was making money off of pharmaceuticals. That's a conspiracy theory? No, it's a fact. He suggested the Ukraine war might go back farther than just the invasion of 3 years ago, that it might have something to do with 2014. He suggested that the World Economic Forum has some pretty bad ideas for the world, including eating bugs, 5 minutes, 15-minute cities, and owning nothing. It's on their website. These aren't conspiracy theories, but yet they wouldn't even tell the guy why. And you have to actually dig deep. People are looking it up today, and Ryan Gerritsen here actually did a fairly intense look at Stéphane Marquis' X postings, and that's all he could come up with. He was questioning these so-called conspiracy theories about Ukraine, about WEF. But I tell you, and you mentioned this. This really got me down for two reasons. Because first of all, we had the Liberals, and I say we because I don't want Carney to win, but the Conservatives had Carney on the ropes with this China issue. They had them on the ropes with this candidate from Markham, who resigned because he was facing a potential RCMP investigation. They had Carney on the ropes over this. So what do? Not only do they get rid of this guy in Markham, if I put this up, no, I didn't. But there's another candidate from Western Ontario who was shelved as well the same day, and I think there's actually a third from BC. But it seems to be a free speech issue, and I think Pierre Poilievre needs to come out and overrule this and to say that my communications people were wrong. We don't fire candidates because they post things on the internet that are merely questioning the popular narrative. Yeah, if you're on there with Holocaust denial or something crazy like that, maybe you shouldn't be running for the party. But if you're out there questioning the liberal narrative, why are they canceling these candidates?
I think it's because they're scared, because the way the mainstream will spin it, and I saw them already doing it, is, oh, pro-Russia, not we don't want to support Ukraine. So they'll take something that he said, and I did look at what that MP that got fired said, and it was all factual. But as soon as this is what they do, they call it conspiracy to turn the voting CBC viewers against him, and they'll spin it as pro-Russia. And so I don't think that Pierre really gives a crap about what he said. I think he probably agrees with 80 to 90% of it. It's all that they're so scared of how CBC is going to spin it. They think they won't be able to control the narrative. And that is what I actually think is going on. And I think they're being scared. And because it's such a close race, they're not making necessarily the right decisions. That MP would probably have gotten elected anyways, but it's the overall narrative spinning that they're worried about. And so I agree with you. I can't believe they got rid of him, but there's a narrative war going on.
Well, yeah, it is a close race, but it's becoming less and less of a close race every day in favor of the Liberals. And I don't think this kind of nonsense is helping. They can't afford to give away seats. They can't afford to start looking for candidates at this stage in the game. But what my fear is, and I've gone through so many Conservative campaigns, both inside and outside of the House of Commons, where I once worked, and they always have a tendency to move to the left in the middle of a campaign because they panic. And they think, oh my God, we're going to lose unless the CBC loves us. And the CBC is never going to love you. And you're never going to have the mainstream media's approval. And what really gets me angry here, Odessa, is that the Pierre Poilievre people refuse to go on conservative podcasts. Absolutely refuse. I was that far away from getting Pierre Poilievre on the show. I deal with somebody in Poilievre's office. They were very sympathetic. Yeah, okay, it sounds okay. It sounds like you've done some fairly good work. I don't think we have any reason to be afraid of going on. The answer within 48 hours was absolutely not.
Yeah.
And this is the answer they're giving to not just Canadian podcasters, but huge podcasters from the United States. Patrick Bet-David has called twice. I mean, this is the guy who gets millions of viewers, a lot of them Canadian, and they've hung up on Patrick Bet-David. They won't talk to Joe Rogan. They won't. I go on Redacted every week. This is another show with huge Canadian following. They won't go on Redacted. They won't go on any American podcaster, and let alone Canadian. I think this is a huge error because they can't afford to play the old political game of, hey, we might get a good mention in CBC over this. And so what? It doesn't matter. They're ignoring the new media. And that's because the people running this campaign are either ignorant, stupid, or sabotaging the campaign. I can't think of a third or fourth alternative. But they should be on my show. They should be on your show. They should be talking about these issues. They have nothing to lose at this point.
I was just texting back and forth, actually, with Drea Humphrey from Rebel about all of this. And again, and I'm not saying it's right, I think what we kind of think is they know that the reason why the Libs are doing so much better in polling is because the NDP voters are now switching to voting for Carney. That's their major problem that they can't control. You've got the leftiest of the lefty loonies saying, okay, I'll go Lib and be a little less Marxist because, we don't want something like Poilievre because they're mind controlled that Poilievre's going to destroy the country. So they've lost those numbers, and they know that there's undecideds that are leaning either to the Libs or to the Conservatives. There's people that jumped ship from the Libs before the tariff thing that are now going over to Conservatives. This is what we think. And I'm not saying it's right, but the Conservative Party is so worried about not getting the people that are undecided that if they go on any of the podcasts that you mentioned, they know that it's so evil, Carney's team and CBC, etc. They will find something that one of those podcasters said a year ago, nothing to do with Poilievre, pull it out. They'll put it on, prime time. They'll play it on a loop for 5 days until they've convinced these undecideds that Poilievre is just a right-wing American-loving loon. And so I do agree with you, but Canada is different than America. We are dumber to the PSYOP. We have to admit it to ourselves. We are polite and we are dumb to what's actually going on. Not the awake people. But this is why, in a way, the conservatives are bumbling in the dark, because they don't know what to do without getting burned.
Okay, that's a very interesting analysis, and I think it's probably reflective of what the communications team is thinking. And I know these people in the communications team, and I know what they're doing. I think they're dead wrong on this. It never works. Liberal light never works for the conservatives. People say, well, sounds too much like the liberals. I guess I'll vote for Mark Carney. But that's the mentality. And I'm hoping and praying within the next 3 weeks there's going to be a turnaround. But at least, I mean, Poilievre is still attracting great numbers at rallies. Now, this is from PEI. So he had a great rally in Surrey the other day as well. I mean, he's packing the houses, no question about it. But as you mentioned with the polling, and this just came out this morning from where is it here? Oh yeah, this is Nanos, and I'm trying to keep track of too many of these at the same time. But as you mentioned, Odessa, yes, the NDP vote is collapsing. And it's going to the Liberals. Yes, it's exactly what's happening. This is almost like the worst fear of the Conservative Party for the last 2 or 3 decades, that there would be a a fusion between the Liberal Party and the NDP Party, and it seems to be happening in real time right now without any intent of it.
Yeah, the NDP screwed us for the last 8 years by colluding with the Liberals. It's a uniparty, and now they're screwing us again. That's just what the NDP does. They just screw people. That's all I can say about them. And I wonder, with this polling, who is it that they're polling? I'm not saying the polls are fake. We have to be careful with that. But who are they polling? I find this hard to believe.
Yeah, I would be more optimistic if they were closer, and I think maybe they are. Abacus has them much closer than Ecos. Ecos is the worst, of course. Angus Reid and the other ones all have the Liberals moving ahead. But I do think there's the same effect that we saw in the United States. First of all, that Kamala Harris consistently was tied or ahead of Donald Trump until Election Day, when, shock of all shocks, Donald Trump shellacked her. And of course, the crowds were just tremendous at Kamala Harris rallies, except they weren't. There was a lot of artificial intelligence going on, and Trump was packing them in huge numbers consistently. So I think that is obviously going on. But I also think, just as they discovered in the United States, a lot of Republicans didn't want to say they were voting Donald Trump for president. And so they would sometimes fly or not respond. And I'm hoping that's the case in Canada, that a lot of conservative supporters are not identifying themselves because they just don't want people to know, or they think the pollsters or the media will get them for it, or there'll be some repercussions because you can't be conservative in this country. It's dangerous. So I think that might be playing a role in all of this. And I hope that's the case, because otherwise these polls are devastating.
I hope so too. And I had the exact same thought. I thought, are we smart enough to do what the Americans did and actually lie and say I'm voting NDP or Lib, so that they don't know which ridings to hone in on to try and psyop more? But then I thought, no, we're not smart enough up here to do what the Americans did. Can you tell I've lost faith?
Well, my goal is every day, 7 days a week, I'm going to be going after Mark Carney as a globalist, as somebody who's in China's pocket, as somebody who will never put Canada first, to quote Pierre Poilievre, and as somebody, it's a joke for him to stand in front of a sign that says Canada strong, because he is all for China strong, for globalism strong. He's never been Canada strong. He hasn't lived in this country in 11 years. And now suddenly Ottawa's his hometown. Before that, it was Edmonton. He grew up in Edmonton. He played hockey there. The guy is a manufactured candidate. I call him a Manchurian candidate.
Yes, yeah.
Because I think he's been installed
Yep.
I've never seen, I had to laugh. I'm sorry to take up more of your time here, but I had to laugh at what I call his leadership walk, not a leadership race. He walked through that, going to little coffee clutches every day and meeting groups of 30 to 50 people, overwhelming enthusiasm. And the same speech every day. And I thought, does this guy even trying? Is he even trying to appeal to people? Because I watched him every day, and he's reading the same talking points. He's reading the same speech, and I thought, well, yeah, he's going to win this. We know it's preordained. We know it's a coronation, but surely to goodness, he's going to come up with a victory speech when he wins the leadership. And no, he had the same speech again. And he read the same speech. And it was all about Pierre Poilievre doesn't get a security clearance. And Pierre Poilievre has worked his entire life in government. And I've been in the private sector. And it's the same speech. And I thought, God, you can't make this up. And when I know Ezra Levant did a fairly big analysis of riding by riding, how Mark Carney fared. And he got like 86 to 87% on every riding, including those of Christian Freeland.
I know.
Incredible.
This, Ezra was saying how that's just statistically impossible. And I find Ezra is very careful with facts. He doesn't put out anything that he thinks, could be kind of fake news. The fact that he looked at those statistics and said that is just statistically impossible, something really, really funky happened there. And so you're right. I do believe he was installed because those stats are just statistically impossible.
Yeah. And just final note, a lot of people have been expressing concern to me about how the votes will be tabulated on election day, because I recently voted in the Ontario election, and we've gone here to the electronic voting system, and it's Dominion at it again. That's all I'll say about Dominion. But we all know that they've had nothing but problems everywhere they put their fingers. So I called Elections Canada last week, and I said, I'm just calling. I'm an interested party. I worked for Elections Canada in 2015, which is true. I did for that election. And I said, I'm curious, are we going to the electronic system of voting, or will people be filling out a ballot by hand, and will they be counted by human beings? Now, the guy couldn't answer immediately. And I said, oh. So he wandered away for 5 minutes and came back, and he says, to tell you the truth, I share your concern about this. We've always done it by humans counting the ballots, and it's always worked. It's always been something that all political parties have accepted. All Canadians accept this as an honest process, and we're going to continue doing that. So I was heartened to hear that, because I thought, oh my God, if we go to electronic voting, the potential for abuse is there. But I have heard recently, I had a guy on the show yesterday from Make Canada Great Again, and he was telling me he literally was he didn't vote, but he would have been able to vote in 13 different constituencies in the last Ontario election, and he could have voted by presenting a bottle of pills.
Oh, prescription? Like prescription?
Yeah. And so I'm thinking, my God, if that's going to be the case for the federal election, we could be in trouble. But anyway, I thank you for your time here, Odessa, and I share your concern. I'm not giving up. I'm fighting. I'm going to reveal who Mark Carney is every day. But I can tell you, there's a lot of conservatives out there who are taking this election for granted. They still think it's January 6th. That's all I can say. It's like they've been caught in a time warp. And the polls are all crazy. There's no way Pierre's lost 25, 30 points in the last 3 months. It's all lies. It's just the liberal media. It's the pollsters are all against us. And yeah, the pollsters most of them probably are. And yeah, the mainstream media does hate the Conservative Party. But this is not going to be a cakewalk election. Pierre Poilievre has got to be worried. And I think he's got to get a better grip on his communications. And I think he needs to take chances rather than running like a traditional campaign, because the Liberals, I have to say this as somebody who worked in communications before getting back into journalism, they've done an excellent job of lying, fooling Canadians, making up ridiculous stories, and somehow resurrecting a party that was on its deathbed just 3 months ago. And they've done a wonderful job of resurrecting this dead party. And if anybody thinks this is all a mirage, this is all fake, they've got to take this seriously, because this country is at stake here. And I think if Mark Carney wins, it might be the beginning of the end of this country. I seriously believe that. I've served this country in the military. I believe in Canada. I'll continue to fight for Canada as long as I possibly can, but I don't know where we're going if Mark Carney wins an election, is actually elected as Prime Minister. I'll leave the last word to you.
I completely agree with everything you said. And in fact, people I've been talking to have already said, if Mark Carney wins, I'm leaving the country, because they're so fearful. And my response was, I would too, but my son isn't finished high school yet, and I want to keep him with his friends. But I don't know where we're going to go if Mark Carney gets in. Who knows in 3 years what will be going on with this country?
Well, that's exactly it. So I'll leave it at that, Odessa. Thank you for your time today. This has been a very stimulating conversation, and your insight is always valued, and hope to have you back again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye for now. That was Odessa Orlewicz, a good friend on the internet. We don't see each other much, but we talk on the internet all the time, and she's always got great insightful analysis. It's so nice to have her on the show today. And by the way, folks, resolve to resist. I say that at the end of every show. We've got to keep fighting. We've got to keep fighting for Canada, for our future. It ain't over yet. Remember that. I'll be back again tomorrow at the usual time of 10 a.m. Oh, actually, tomorrow is the verdict in the Freedom Convoy trial. Come on out if you can to the Ottawa Courthouse, Provincial Courthouse on Elgin Street. Show your support for Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. Starts at 10 o'clock. If you're in town, if you're in Ottawa, come out and show your support. They've gone through hell, the lawfare, everything else during this time, and I'll be there. So the broadcast will be later in the day, because I've got to find out what the verdict is, and I want to interview Mr. Greenspan, the lawyer, and some other folks there. So we'll be probably 2 or 3 o'clock tomorrow. Thanks for joining us today. I'll see you tomorrow.